What would you do if a flight attendant slapped your 5-year-old child, and you didn't know she was moments away from ruining your entire family's life? This shocking incident involving Richard Gere's granddaughter has sparked an outrage you won't believe. Stick around to see how this one moment on a plane is about to change everything. Flight 726 from New York's JFK to Los Angeles was packed that day, an early summer afternoon when families juggled vacation plans and professionals typed away on laptops, tethered to deadlines even in the sky. In the middle of the plane, nestled in a window seat of row 18, sat 5-year-old Emma Langford, wearing light pink overalls and white Velcro sneakers, her curly brown hair tied into 2 small pigtails. Beside her sat her mother, Rachel, a composed woman in her 30s who looked both alert and exhausted, the way only single mothers on long-haul flights could. Emma clutched her best friend in the world, a floppy pink stuffed bunny named Fluff, and was entertaining herself by humming softly and peeking at the clouds through the tiny oval window. She had asked her mother at least 5 times if they were almost there yet, and Rachel, patient despite her headache, had answered every time with a gentle, "Not yet, sweetheart." They had boarded early thanks to pre-boarding for families, and Rachel had taken care to bring everything to keep her daughter busy: snacks, stickers, coloring books, even a small tablet loaded with Bluey episodes. Meanwhile, in the aisle, Marla Donnelly, a flight attendant with 7 years of service under her belt, was already teetering on the edge of burnout. The airline was short-staffed again, her back hurt, and she hadn't had a proper day off in 2 weeks. Her job had lost all charm. It was no longer the glamorous career she once dreamt of, just an exhausting cycle of coffee orders, turbulence, and entitled passengers. She noticed Emma almost immediately. Children were unpredictable, and after dealing with a toddler's tantrum on a previous flight, Marla's tolerance for youthful energy had worn thin. Emma had a habit of lightly tapping her feet against the seat in front of her, not hard, not enough to disturb, but noticeable. When the elderly gentleman in that seat glanced back in minor annoyance, Marla took it upon herself to speak. She approached the row with tight lips and crouched just enough to make her tone feel sharp but controlled. "Ma'am," she said to Rachel, "you need to keep your child from kicking the seat. It's bothering other passengers." Rachel nodded. "Of course, I'll remind her. She doesn't mean to." But that brief exchange planted a seed of judgment in Marla's mind. Over the next hour, she kept looking toward row 18, noting each little movement, each giggle, each poke at the touchscreen. Emma wasn't misbehaving, just being 5. But to Marla, it was one more source of chaos in an already difficult day. Then the turbulence started. It wasn't violent, but it was enough to jostle trays, send soda sloshing over ice, and raise tension in the cabin. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed, and Marla rushed up and down the aisle, reminding people to sit down and stow their belongings. She passed Emma's row again. The girl, curious, had pushed the flight attendant call button, not understanding its purpose, just fascinated by the small, glowing light it produced. Marla returned moments later, already fuming. The call button had been pressed again. She snapped. "You need to stop touching that button," she said sternly, directing her words toward Emma, not Rachel. Emma blinked, shrinking back into her seat. She didn't know. Rachel interjected. She thought it was part of the game. "She's 5. Marla turned toward Rachel, her voice rising. "This isn't a playground. It's a plane. Maybe if you were parenting a little better." That was enough to catch the attention of the passengers in the surrounding rows. Heads turned. Phones lifted. Cameras started to roll silently. Rachel stood halfway up from her seat. "Excuse me." And then it happened. In a moment of unfiltered, raw impulse, Marla leaned over and slapped Emma across the face. Not hard enough to injure, but loud enough to shock the entire cabin. The sound echoed like thunder in the metal tube. Rachel screamed, "Are you out of your mind?" Emma's face crumpled. Tears flowed instantly as she grabbed Fluff and began to sob uncontrollably. Rachel lunged between her daughter and Marla, yelling, "Don't you touch my child!" But she didn't strike back. Her voice was fierce enough. Passengers from multiple rows were on their feet now, surrounding them. A man 2 rows back shouted, She hit that little girl," while a college student across the aisle recorded the whole thing, narrating under her breath. "This lady just slapped a kid. Oh my God." Marla backed away, her face ghostly pale, hands shaking. I didn't mean." She wouldn't stop pushing the button. "That's a child," someone yelled. "You're an adult. You don't hit children." Another voice added, "Is this how Delta treats families now?" The captain was notified through the intercom system, and the remaining crew rushed to the back of the plane to confer in hushed tones. Marla was quietly escorted to the galley, her face blank, her voice gone. Rachel, meanwhile, cradled Emma and whispered to her, "It's okay, baby. I've got you. It's over." Someone offered her an ice pack. A flight nurse sitting near the front moved back to check on Emma's face, confirming there was no serious injury, but warning about emotional trauma. Others gave their support, murmuring sympathy and outrage. And all the while, the camera phones kept rolling. In first class, a man who had been asleep behind a sleeping mask slowly stirred. He sat up, rubbed his face, and removed his glasses. He wore a simple blue scarf and a cashmere coat, looking older but unmistakable to anyone who grew up watching movies in the 80s and 90s. Richard Gere, iconic actor, humanitarian, and, as it turned out, Emma's grandfather, had been quietly flying in first class on his way to L.A. for a film festival appearance. He stood and asked a nearby attendant what had happened. "A flight attendant hit a little girl in the back," she said, quietly shaken. Gere froze. "A little girl?" "Yes, sir. She's okay now, but—" He didn't wait for more. He started walking down the aisle, past rows of stunned passengers, phones now recording him too. When he reached row 18, Rachel looked up from Emma's tear-streaked face. Their eyes met. "Dad," Rachel said, her voice breaking. Richard's eyes went wide as he dropped to his knees beside the seat. "Emma," he whispered. Emma looked at him, eyes red and wide, and buried her face in his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, slowly and carefully, as if touching something precious and broken. A silence fell over the surrounding rows. No one knew what to say. Most had assumed he was just another celebrity flying private, not riding coach with them. He looked up at Rachel, his voice low but firm. "What exactly happened?" Rachel told him, her words short and cold, no need for embellishment. He listened, jaw clenched, fury buried under years of training in diplomacy and public grace. Then, standing slowly, he turned to the passengers watching him. "I promise you all," Richard Gere said, voice steady, "this is not the end of this story." As the flight continued its journey to Los Angeles, the mood on board had shifted dramatically. The once mundane atmosphere had turned into one of tension and disbelief. Passengers in the surrounding rows whispered in hushed voices, the whole plane now aware that a public incident of abuse had occurred mid-air. Some passengers were still filming, their cameras trained on Richard Gere, who now cradled Emma in his arms, his face a mask of concern and anger. The young girl, still sniffling, had calmed down slightly, but the trauma was evident in her wide, anxious eyes. Rachel, her eyes still red from crying, sat close by, trying to comfort her daughter with soothing words. She had seen the incident firsthand, and now, with her father by her side, she was feeling the weight of the situation shift from a personal confrontation to something larger, something involving the media, the airline, and the general public. She knew it would be impossible to contain the fallout, but what shocked her the most was that this wasn't just any random flight. This was a flight where the mother of the child was the daughter of Richard Gere, one of Hollywood's most beloved stars. For the next hour, the tension remained palpable in the cabin. The flight attendants, now aware that a celebrity was involved, moved quietly around the plane, avoiding eye contact with Gere and his family. Most of them were still processing what had happened, but none of them dared to approach Marla, who had been taken to the back galley. When the captain had announced that they were flying over the mountains near Denver, no one really heard it. All ears were tuned to the low murmur of voices, the sounds of outrage growing louder in the air. As the plane descended into LAX, the mood became even more charged. People were eager to exit, to put some distance between themselves and the spectacle they had just witnessed. But the incident was far from over. As the plane touched down, the wheels hitting the runway with a soft bump. Phones buzzed in the hands of passengers. Someone had already started a live stream on Instagram, broadcasting the aftermath. The first video of the slap had gone viral, but this time, the video didn't show the child's face in tears. Instead, it showed Richard Gere, calm, dignified, and protective, sitting next to his granddaughter. The post read, "Richard Gere's granddaughter slapped by flight attendant. What is happening to customer service?" Rachel looked out the window, feeling the prickle of nervous energy along her spine. As soon as they landed, she knew there would be reporters waiting for them. Social media had already caught fire, and she wasn't sure how this would unfold for her family. Richard, ever the professional, remained composed but didn't look at her directly. He was already on the phone with his publicist, preparing for the inevitable storm. When the plane finally taxied to the gate, the passengers who had been involved in the incident filed off first. There were murmurs of "unbelievable" and "I can't believe they let it go this far," as people rushed to grab their luggage. As they filed into the terminal, the whispers followed them, but none were louder than the ones discussing what they had seen. A few passengers, realizing who had been sitting in the aisle seat with his family, moved in close to get a better look at Gere. "Are you really Richard Gere?" a woman asked, staring at him in awe. Gere smiled tightly, his face showing little emotion. "Yes, I am, but I need to ask for some privacy for my family right now." Rachel stayed close, Emma in her arms, still in shock from the events that had transpired. The moment they entered the terminal, she was approached by a reporter with a camera crew. "Ms. Langford, can you comment on the altercation on the plane? Was it really your daughter who was slapped by the flight attendant?" Rachel paused, feeling a wave of exhaustion and dread. This wasn't how she had wanted her day to go. She had wanted a peaceful flight to Los Angeles, a quiet trip to see her father. Now, her daughter was the center of a media firestorm, and she didn't know how to handle it. "This is a very difficult situation," Rachel said, keeping her voice calm despite the rush of emotions. "My daughter was treated unfairly. She was struck by an adult who should have known better. We will be pursuing legal action to ensure this doesn't happen again. I want to make it clear, this was not a case of misbehaving. This was a case of inappropriate and unacceptable behavior by a flight attendant." The camera crew nodded, but the reporter pressed on. "Do you have any comment on the fact that your father, Richard Gere, was involved in this situation?" Rachel hesitated, feeling her father's presence beside her like an anchor. He was standing there, speaking quietly into his phone, but he was visibly upset, and it was clear that he wasn't going to let this go without taking action. "My father is deeply concerned," she said, glancing at Richard, who looked up and gave her a small nod. "But right now, my priority is making sure my daughter is okay." The reporters continued their questions, but the family was quickly ushered away by security. The air was filled with the buzz of flashing cameras, and the world was already moving on from the plane, but the incident was far from over. Within minutes, the story had gone viral. News outlets were reporting it across all platforms: TV, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Hashtag flight attendant slaps child was trending worldwide. Within hours, the airline issued a public statement acknowledging the incident. They stated that they were aware of the situation and that they were investigating the matter. The statement also promised that proper steps will be taken to ensure that nothing like this would happen again. The airline was swift to act, but it was clear that the damage was already done. People were angry, and many had already decided that the airline was at fault. Thousands of tweets and posts demanded that Marla be fired immediately. The hashtag fire the flight attendant started gaining traction, and soon it was everywhere. But the real media storm began when Richard Gere himself gave an interview. The actor, known for his calm demeanor in the face of the press, sat down with a network to discuss the situation. In a carefully worded statement, he expressed his deep disappointment in what had happened. "First and foremost, I want to say that my granddaughter and daughter are fine," he said, his voice even but filled with quiet intensity. "What happened on that plane was unacceptable. No child should be subjected to that kind of treatment, especially not in the care of adults who are responsible for their safety and well-being." He paused for a moment, his blue eyes burning with determination. "This is not just about what happened to Emma. It's about making sure that this never happens again to any child on any flight. The behavior of this flight attendant was beyond the pale, and it is my hope that the airline will take the necessary steps to ensure justice is served. The interview went viral, and within hours, Marla's name was everywhere. Her past was dug up by the press, her history with the airline, her previous complaints filed by passengers, and the intense scrutiny of her every move. The hashtag #FireMarla trended alongside hashtag #FireTheFlightAttendant as the public rallied behind Emma and her family. In the midst of it all, the Langford family tried to keep a low profile. They knew that they would need to pursue legal action, but the emotional toll on Rachel and Emma was already immense. Richard Gere, despite his public persona, was struggling too. He wanted to protect his daughter and granddaughter from the media storm, but there was only so much he could do. By the time the day ended, the story had become a global conversation. The airline, now under intense pressure, issued another statement. Marla was placed on administrative leave pending the results of an internal investigation. The world waited for the next move. Would there be charges filed? Would Marla be fired? Would this incident spark a broader conversation about airline safety, child protection, and the treatment of passengers? The story had only just begun. The days following the incident were filled with intense scrutiny, not just from the public, but also from legal teams, airline executives, and media outlets. Richard Gere had become the face of the incident, but it wasn't just his fame that caught the world's attention. It was his fierce commitment to his family's safety and well-being. From the moment the incident occurred, he had made it clear that the consequences for Marla, the flight attendant, would not be taken lightly. What had started as a moment of personal crisis had now escalated into a battle for justice, and Gere was prepared to fight. The media storm only grew in the days after the incident. News outlets scrambled to report the latest developments, while social media platforms buzzed with hashtags calling for justice. Hashtag Justice for Emma trended globally, and the hashtag #FireMarla reached millions of tweets, comments, and shares. The public was outraged, and the calls for accountability were deafening. As the story progressed, it became clear that this was no longer just about a child being slapped by a flight attendant. It was about the very treatment of customers, the lack of accountability in certain industries, and a need for serious reforms in how airlines handled situations involving passengers, especially children. As the investigation continued, Marla's background became a focal point for the media. Several passengers from previous flights had come forward, sharing stories of their own negative interactions with her. Some passengers reported rude behavior, while others claimed that she had been unprofessional during previous flights. The airline, initially reluctant to take swift action, now faced a mounting pressure to address these concerns seriously. But no one was certain how far the investigation would go, or how it might impact the future of flight attendants like Marla. Public opinion was divided. While some supported her, many felt that the severity of her actions warranted a firmer response. It wasn't just the general public who had become invested in the outcome. Celebrities and public figures also voiced their support for Emma and her family. Some took to social media to express their outrage, while others offered messages of encouragement and solidarity. It wasn't lost on anyone that Richard Gere was more than just an actor. He was also an activist who had dedicated much of his life to various humanitarian causes. His commitment to family and social justice added a powerful layer to the story, making it a cause many could rally behind. The night after the incident, Gere issued a heartfelt statement through his publicist. "I want to thank everyone for their outpouring of support during this difficult time," the statement read. "My daughter and granddaughter are my top priority right now, and I will do whatever it takes to ensure that what happened on that flight is not forgotten." This is not just about one incident. It's about ensuring that no child, no person is treated with such disrespect again. Meanwhile, the airline had issued multiple statements, first confirming that Marla had been placed on administrative leave and would be undergoing a full investigation. But their response wasn't enough. People demanded more transparency. People demanded justice. And so, the airline was forced to go on the defensive. The CEO of the airline, Carol Henderson, took to television in an attempt to quell the growing outrage. In a highly publicized interview, she apologized on behalf of the company, acknowledging the severity of the incident and vowing that the airline would implement stricter training for its flight attendants, focusing on child safety, emotional intelligence, and conflict resolution. "I understand the gravity of the situation," Henderson said, her voice somber and sincere. "This should never have happened. We are taking immediate steps to make sure it never happens again, and we are committed to making things right for the Langford family." But for Richard, this was not enough. He felt the need to personally take action. Over the next several days, he worked closely with a legal team, discussing possible courses of action to ensure that Marla would be held accountable for her actions. He wasn't just fighting for Emma. He was fighting for every child who had been treated unfairly by an authority figure and had been unable to speak out. The case quickly became a symbol of the systemic issues within the airline industry regarding passenger treatment and the sometimes disproportionate power wielded by flight attendants. While the media focused on the legal angle, the story also began to take on a more personal dimension. Rachel Langford, the mother of the child at the center of the story, became an unwitting symbol of every parent's worst fear: having their child hurt in a place where they should feel safe. She had already been struggling with the challenges of raising Emma as a single mother, and now she had to contend with the added burden of dealing with a highly publicized scandal that had touched her family. Rachel had been reluctant to engage with the press at first, but as the media frenzy grew, she realized she had to speak out. Her interviews focused on the pain she felt as a mother, watching her daughter cry in the aftermath of the slap. "I never imagined something like this would happen," Rachel said in a press interview. "I trusted that the flight attendants were there to ensure my daughter's safety, and yet here we are. What happened to Emma was not just wrong. It was a violation of her trust. I don't want any other parent to go through what I did." Rachel's words resonated with millions of parents across the world. Her vulnerability in speaking out had humanized the situation, and people could relate to the fear and helplessness she felt. Social media exploded with support, with parents, educators, and activists voicing their outrage and calling for changes to airline policies regarding child passengers. "This is bigger than just one flight," one user wrote. "It's about making sure our children are treated with respect and kindness wherever they go." In the weeks that followed, the airline began to feel the weight of public opinion. The mounting pressure led to further investigations into flight attendant training and customer service practices. While Marla remained on administrative leave, there was increasing speculation as to whether she would ever return to the airline. Legal experts debated whether the airline could be held liable for her actions and what compensation the Langford family might receive for their emotional distress. Meanwhile, the legal team representing Richard and Rachel Langford filed a formal complaint with the airline, accusing Marla of assaulting a minor and demanding that she be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. The case quickly gained national attention, with legal analysts discussing the potential ramifications of the suit and whether the Langfords had a strong enough case to win. Richard Gere, who had always been a staunch advocate for children's rights and justice, made sure to use his platform to keep the issue in the public eye, speaking at press conferences and giving interviews where he emphasized the importance of holding people in positions of power accountable. "It's not just about this one incident. It's about ensuring that we create an environment where children are respected, where they feel safe, and where their well-being is a top priority," Gere said during an appearance on a popular talk show. "The airline industry needs to step up. We need better policies. We need better training for everyone who interacts with children, and we need to make sure that incidents like this are never brushed aside." The case continued to develop, with both sides preparing for what promised to be a long and complex legal battle. As the Langfords made their way through the emotional and legal challenges, the public support remained unwavering. People from all walks of life were rallying behind them, pushing for reforms in how airlines treated passengers, especially those traveling with children. For Richard, this wasn't just about securing justice for his granddaughter. It was about starting a conversation that could lead to real change. By the time the legal proceedings were underway, the case had already transformed from an isolated incident into a landmark issue in the public consciousness. It wasn't just about one flight attendant's actions. It was about making sure that families and children traveling by air were treated with dignity, care, and respect. And in the process, Richard Gere had proven that even Hollywood icons could use their platforms to fight for what was right, to defend those who couldn't defend themselves, and to stand up for a future where kindness and respect were the gold standard, whether in the skies or on the ground.